Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant. Today, I'm going to be covering this book, Legends Lattes. So this book is written by Travis Baldree, and the cover art is by Carson Lowmiller. The cover art, again, there, and then if you look on the back page, there's a little like rodent-like character there, and some more art. The full piece is fascinating, and on all of his social media, Travis Baldree does spend a lot of time thanking Carson Lowmiller for an excellent job. Now, some of this rant is going to be from some of Travis Baldree's blog posts as well. In particular, there's a post on medium.com. It's a pretty long one called Self-Published Book Launch A to Z. And at the top it says it's a 51-minute read, so it really is a long and in-depth look at this book. The plot summary for this is that Viv is a orc barbarian. Effectively, she's a warrior in an adventuring party. The story opens with her going out to a specific bounty and getting only a small piece of the reward, saying that all she really needs is one piece taken from the monster they defeat. And then she retires from the adventuring business and then spends the rest of the story, and this is the pull for the story, is that she spends the rest of her time starting a coffee shop because she had seen a gnomish coffee shop in one town and thought it was really nice, and thought with an understanding of the different flavors and options, she decided to make a cafe. A lot of this story revolves around starting up a business and various issues that arise while starting that business. So it details her getting to town and then buying old property, refurbishing that property, working with different contractors to make it the way she wants it to be, herself working on it, and then once she's got it started, she works with other people to make all of the finishing touches such that the store is as good as she wants it to be. And then once the store is finally in a good place, she ends up dealing with a protection racket, and she interacts with that. She's got a romance with the character on the cover, and as you can see again, there's that little bit of like the tail on her arm, a very flirtatious kind of look to the cover. There's a lot of that softer side of romance because it isn't very sexually explicit. It's more the romance rather than the relationship side of things. The various aspects that go into making this business work also includes dealing with former friends who feel like they were stiffed when it comes to the reward of that last mission. And that's where the like climactic shenanigans happen, but it's not the main focus of the book. And the main focus of the book is partially what makes this specifically a kind of new genre. If you look online, you'll see a lot of places calling this genre cozy fantasy, and I feel like that isn't the most accurate way to describe this, but is a good title for that genre. From what I've seen of cozy fantasy, and I haven't seen too much on the shelves, but Legends Lattes and its prequel, Bookshops and Bone Dust, and then also Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, that kind of cozy fantasy is more appropriately, in my mind, called capitalist fantasy, or maybe Hallmark fantasy. And that's something, I say that partially because Travis Baldree, the author, has gone on record on multiple times saying that what he sought to create was a Hallmark movie set in the Forgotten Realms. He obviously sets it in his own setting, but it's that kind of vibe to the story. But a lot of Hallmark movies focus more on coming back to the small town and then having a strong sense of community and setting down roots, whereas this isn't necessarily about coming home to a place you've been gone for a long time, and more about finding a small town, finding a close knit community, and starting a business. It doesn't quite fit that Hallmark movie style because the Hallmark movie style is very centered on a rural small town vibe. This is more of a city, and this is more of focus on a neighborhood. So the vibes are kind of there, but it's not really a good Hallmark fantasy. It gets cozy down pretty well. And on the fantasy side, cozy fantasy exists within a realm of like egalitarian society. Everyone can contribute to society, male, female, whatever species you are treated for the most part equally. And that's Legends and Lattes to a T. I think that cozy fantasy is a bit of a misnomer, and when I look at this genre, what I think of is the capitalist elements to it. It's not necessarily a feudal society. What you are looking at is modern capitalism put into a fantasy veneer. And that is what he went for. And a lot of what he discusses in this blog post is committing to doing a NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, where he spent the entire month of November just doubling down on writing a book. And what he says, the key differences this time that helped him complete the book, because he had tried in the past and failed, is that he needed to keep it simple. Every other attempt he made completing a novel failed because it was too big, too complicated, wanted to be too much. He needed it to be relatable, which I think the cozy fantasy, the modern capitalist vibe set in a fantasy veneer, is the large part of that relatability. He decided to write something that was relatable to himself, and he didn't know that he was going to do this until it started making itself apparent in what was going on with the hopeful orc barista. So he had a couple realizations, and he said none of them are earth-shattering, but he had them embarrassingly late in life. And these are: you aren't stuck doing what you've always done. It's never too late to start again. People are as important to your life as what you decide to do. It's valuable and sometimes very hard to make room in your life for things that aren't work. People are at heart good, often when you least expect it. The third element he said was that he needed it to be fun, so he says he still smiles thinking about an orc opening a coffee shop, because conceptually it's ridiculous, but he didn't treat it that way. The book plays it straight, and that's what makes this a bit more unique and why people appreciate and love this book. And then 4, he said he outlined. He didn't want to push this at all, but for years he thought he was a pantser. Turns out I'm not. If what you've been trying doesn't work, maybe try something else. And so he goes and he has an outline. He makes it fun. He makes it relatable. He makes it simple. And then he also gets a writing buddy. He says, Avon Shorekind was my nano writing buddy. We kept each other personally accountable and encouraged one another. And he can't overstress how useful this was. This is just the first part of the article. There's a lot more in this about how he wrote, what programs he used, his different analyses while self-publishing, and so on and so forth. The actual meat of this article is much more than I can cover in my usual length videos, but I am going to leave a link to that article so that you can read it as well. I think it could be worth its own rant, but it's probably better from the perspective of someone who has been published as a writer and not just someone who is reading what someone else has said, because a writer would be able to break it down into the different portions of the article and really get into the nitty gritty, but I can't do that. So I am going to cover other aspects of this book now. It is a really fascinating book. It is a popular book for a very good reason. Now, I also have a cryptid press copy of this book. I bought it at Coas, and I still don't know how Coas managed to get multiple copies of the self-published edition of this book on its shelf in early 2022, I want to say it was. I bought this as soon as it hit the shelves. Like I said, I don't know how Coas managed to get this so early, but I do have one of the cryptid press copies, and since then, the second edition and everything after that has been published by Tor. Now, I keep this book on the shelf behind me, and I include it next to a couple other really good books that I think are very similar in style, or rather in subject. If I were to name the greater genre I think this belongs to, I think Legends and Lattes, Bookshops and Bone Dust, Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, Orconomics, Son of a Lich, and I think Dragonfired, something like that is the third book of the series. It's all a similar style of setting where everyone is, in theory, egalitarian. It's less feudal and more modern capitalist in style, with this fantasy veneer over top of it. And because each of them focus on a very money and capital since all of them have a strong emphasis on money and capital, I feel like they fit best into an overall genre of capitalist fantasy. So a while ago, I did discuss Orconomics, which is a satiric entry in the capitalist fantasy, but it goes into depth about all the different needly bits about how capitalism is baked into its setting. And Legends and Lattes doesn't do that, but it is very clear that in a lot of the ways that Orconomics is about capitalism, Legends and Lattes is about capitalism, but in a playing it straight way rather than playing it satirically way. But for the most part, Legends and Lattes doesn't have to get to that point. Everyone is considered equal. It's kind of like how a lot of isekai stories will just skip any social commentary to just get to the fantasy. So like Konosuba, as an example, you never really see any gender norms that force people into certain careers or keep people away from certain careers. And so that one has that very modern society feel to it with a fantasy veneer. And I think a lot of them are like that. And that's also what like Legends and Lattes feels like. It could be plopped into, just dropped into a lot of fantasy isekai, fantasy stories in general. There's a lot less social struggle in this kind of story, which leaves it room, a lot of room to get into the meat, which is, like I said, and what I really appreciate about it too, this startup business kind of focus. Legends and Lattes is a fantastic book. I recommend it to anyone who likes fantasy. I think it's a nice, relaxing fantasy to read, and cozy is a good way to describe it. I just don't think cozy fantasy as a subgenre name really fits, and I think I would prefer if capitalist fantasy was what stuck in most people's minds. So yeah, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant.